Wonderful, thank you. So, introducing myself, I'm Abby. I work for Flourish Together as one of the enterprise and learning managers. Please do feel free, as I've already said, for anyone who's just joined now, introduce yourself in the comments. And do also, as we go through this session, the A to Z of bid writing, do feel free to share your experiences of anything sort of that feels relevant as we go in the comments with one another. Feel free to sort of have that conversation there. Um, the structure of today's session will be that I'm going to share 6 bits of advice. We are literally going to go through the alphabet. 6 bits of advice um, about bid writing, writing a killer bid, and then I'll open up for questions, and then you can unmute yourself or pop things in the comments. I can't see the comments in present of you, so if there's something that you ask in the comments, Anna, do feel free to shout them out. But do feel free to unmute yourself when it comes to questions. As I said, the session is being recorded. So about Flourish Together, just in case anyone here doesn't know Flourish already, we are a social enterprise based in Greater Manchester, and we work all across Greater Manchester supporting people to set up social enterprises, particularly people from marginalised communities. And we do one-to-one support, we run programs, we do all sorts of things. We do sort of advocacy work, we do consultancy, and it's all about helping people to set up social enterprises and feel like social enterprise is something for them, regardless of where they come from or sort of what confidence they need building up or what skills they need building up. So one of the things that's come up a lot recently is lots of people are really interested in learning more about bid writing and writing a really strong bid. So we've already run this session a couple of times in person. We're running this one online. Um, I'm really happy to be able to say we've been awarded some funding over the next handful of months, which is going to mean we're hopefully going to be able to do more bid writing support in person. But this does mean that this might be the only online session that we run in a little while. So I was keen to get everyone in once I realised just how much interest we were getting about this online session. So um, off we go with the A to Z of bid writing. I'm going to say, oh no, I can't do it from this position. Anna, are you able to open up? There's a poll on the polls and quizzes button. There should be a poll set up for people to share where they are in their bid writing journey. And then we can sort of get a sense of where people are as we go. I'll make a start, but if you could answer that question, it'd be really useful for us to sort of get an idea of the benchmark of where people are, and then what kinds of things might be useful for you. Hopefully that's popping up on your screens at some point. But I'll make a start on the alphabet. Um, hold on a second. Here we go. A. A is for AI. I'm getting a lot of questions about this at the moment. Um, Lots of people asking if they can use AI in their funding applications. We are in the session mainly going to be talking about grant making organisation, but also some of the things that we talk about today are going to also apply to commissioned opportunities and writing bids for that kind of thing. On the whole, with AI, what I'm hearing across the board from funders is if they get an application that looks like it's written with AI, it's going in the bin. So my very, very strong advice is if AI is something you find really useful, which lots and lots of people do, particularly my neurodivergent friends, colleagues, people that I'm working with in via Flourish, lots of people are saying AI is really, really helpful for them in helping to structure the answers that they're writing. And it's absolutely fine if AI is something that you want to use to put in prompts that are like, help me to structure the answer of this question. But do not, please, please, for the sake of not wasting your time, um, put in an application where the entire answer is just written by AI, because various funders are using tools to be able to siphon out applications that are written by AI. There are a lot where you can actually tell. Like I'm sure we've all received an email written with AI or read something that's written with AI. It is quite clear a lot of the time. But what funders really, really want to hear is your words. I was speaking to a friend who's a funder just yesterday, and she was saying the thing that they really want more than anything from the funding applications that she sees is honesty. They just want to know who you actually are, and they just don't get that through AI. So B is for budget. A question I've had an awful lot recently is what kinds of things can I put in my budget? And the answer is it depends. But one of the things I'm always advising people to aim for is full cost recovery. So one of the things you might do is write out a project plan of all of the things that need to happen in order for your project to get from very start to very finish, and then look at each of those activities and go, what are the associated costs? What do I need to factor in here? And also, what of how much of my time is going to be spent on this? How much of my staff's, my colleagues' time is going to be spent on these different activities? And make sure that you're factoring those kinds of things in. Um, some funders allow you to put in core costs. Other funders don't allow you to put in core costs. It's always worth checking. Sometimes you can get some of your core costs in if you're budgeting in staff time on a day rate. That can be one of the ways that you manage to cover some of the core costs of your staff and running the organisation. But it's always worth checking for any fund that you're applying for whether or not core costs are something that you can budget in, and if so, do they have a restriction on how much of that you can apply for? I don't think I have seen in a very long time any fund where it says that you can put in, for example, the cost of your accountant, or something like that, or the cost of running your website for a year. Those kinds of things you kind of have to, the project, if you're looking for project costs, which is what the overwhelming majority of funding is at the moment, then you need to find ways of covering your core costs without necessarily being able to put in a core costs specific line. So, um, C is for criteria. You'll notice I'm going to whiz through these because I want to make sure that we've also got time for questions, make sure we're covering everything you want. Um, every fund has some kind of criteria that you need to be able to meet. And funding is so incredibly competitive at the moment that to make the best use of your time, you need to make sure that what you're writing, what you're submitting fits with that funder's criteria. Be mindful that some funders will change their criteria from time to time as they release different strategies. Some will do a 5-year strategy, some will do a 1-year strategy, anywhere in between. Some are even doing 10-year strategies. And so that might inform how the criteria change. Some funders have multiple different funds. In fact, a lot of funders have multiple different funds that will all have their own eligibility criteria. And that's eligibility in terms of who their target audience is for different kinds of project. Some funds are specifically for young people, some for people who are experiencing addiction or homelessness or, all kinds of different things. There's also governance, which we'll come on to a little bit later. You need to make sure that you have the right governance structure. So it's always worth doing an awful lot of research into whether or not you can faithfully meet the criteria of that particular fund, because they will be receiving so many applications that they'll be siphoning off, well, that doesn't meet our funding priorities, and so therefore we're not going to consider that application. You want to make best use of your time because funding applications can take a long time to write. D is for databases. There are a few databases out there that have various different bits of information about what funds there are. Most popular is Grant Finder, which you can buy a subscription for. There may be a free model now, I can't remember. But the majority of people that I know who use Grant Finder will go to their local CVS or local infrastructure organisation. In Greater Manchester, so we've got quite a few Greater Manchester people here. That means in Stockport, where I am, Sector 3, MAC in Manchester, Trafford Community Collective. Those are the local infrastructure organisations. There's one for almost every borough. There's one that covers Oldham and Tameside. And they should have access to Grant Finder, or if not, they'll be able to help you to get access to it. Another useful bit of information about getting access to Grant Finder is that all of the big major libraries, the main libraries for each of the boroughs of Greater Manchester, have access to Grant Finder. You have to physically go to the library. And so for Manchester, that's Manchester Central, Altrincham Library in Trafford, Bury Central, Bolton Central. And one top tip that I heard recently from someone is make sure that you phone ahead so that they know that you're coming in. They can make sure that the day that you're coming in, there's a member of staff who knows what the login details are. So you're not getting a wasted journey and they can help you as efficiently as they possibly can. So through Grant Finder, you can filter by various different criteria to find the funds that are most relevant for the thing that you're focusing on, the type of organisation that you are, etc. E is for expectations, and particularly talking about reporting expectations here. Most, not all, but most funders have some kind of reporting mechanism. I did used to work for an organisation that had a grant from a grant making organisation that didn't want you to write reports. And I had the funding manager say to me, Abby, if you write me a report, I'm probably not going to read it. I'd rather just have a conversation with you about how things are going on. That's quite rare. A lot of them do have some expectations about how much reporting you do, and it can really, really vary. So before you put in your funding application, it is well worth finding out what their expectations are about reporting, because reporting takes time. And particularly if it's public money, it will require probably a high reporting burden. There's one funding application that I've written recently where there is quarterly reporting to be quarterly reports to submit, and then also monthly learning meetings to attend with other people who received the grant. And so it is well worth knowing all of that before you write your budget for the project so that you can make sure that you're factoring in enough staff time and the costs of the staff time to meet those reporting expectations. And you may find that you feel actually the reporting expectations for the size of project that you want to do with that fund, the burden is too much, it's too onerous, and then you think, well, I'm going to spend so much time servicing the reporting expectations of the project, then that makes it financially not worth it because there's little money left over for actually doing the project. So there's a little bit of weighing up to do as well as sort of once you've got a sense of what that reporting expectation is it worth it for the time that I then get to spend on actually doing the project? Hopefully the answer is yes, but sometimes it is no. F is for funding manager. All funders, as far as I'm aware, have some sort of funding manager. The bigger ones might have a funding manager for different localities, like the Lottery Community Fund does. Others might be just a much smaller organisation that has just one or two funding managers. If you can, build a relationship with your local funding manager or for the fund, the person who's managing the fund that you want to apply for. Sometimes they won't necessarily have time for that, but if it is possible to do so, it's really, really useful to have that relationship because then you have someone to ask. It's always worth, there's so many things that you might want to ask about a fund before you start writing your application or as you go along the process. Or if things like the reporting expectations aren't clear up front, it's always worth getting in touch, seeing if you can get hold of the funding manager and asking them. Sometimes that funding manager is also sitting on the decision-making panel that makes the decisions about who gets the funding. And so although they can only assess your application based on what's in your written application, they also know a bit of the context and they may be able to advocate for your application, potentially, depending on the funder. But it's well worth knowing who the funding manager is for that fund so that you can ask them questions and build that relationship with them as much as possible. Also be mindful of their time, and they would probably have many other people, but there you go. That's been a lot. That's been a lot of information. So I'm going to just pause for a minute and have open for questions. If anyone wants to put up their hand and come off mute and ask your question, please do feel free. Also clocking the answers to the poll. I see we've got quite a lot of people who've not written the bid before, and then sort of a mix of that and people who've submitted bids already. So that's really valuable to know. Thank you so much.
David's got his hand up, Abby. You might.
Oh, David, thank you, Anna. Can't see. David, I can't see you at all. Are you on mute potentially?
No, I
I'm
think
not
No,
on
you're
mute.
not. There you are. Hello. I can see you. I can hear you.
I'm okay to ask a question.
Sure, of course you are.
Yeah, so you were talking there about core funding. Is this, from the accounting perspective, is this what they call restricted and unrestricted funding? More of an
Um,
accounting thing rather than a bid
I'm
thing.
not an accountant, so I can't necessarily speak to the accounting bit of it. But restricted funding is where you have to spend it on specific things. Unrestricted funding might be they say you can we'll fund this project, but you can put some of it in core costs. You can put it in whatever. Um, Core costs can be anything that enables your organization to run. And some funders just don't want to fund, they really want to preserve their funding just for anything that is specifically for that project. And so some of them can be very much like you've written your budget up top and we want to monitor. I've worked with a funder on a fund previously where any time that I wanted to move something from one budget line to another, they wanted to be consulted about it. And I said, we didn't actually need to buy IT equipment in the end, so I'd like to put that towards events. I would have to go to them prior and get that approval before I could move to that. That was also a funder that allowed us to put in, I think, 30% core costs. And sort of they weren't restrictive about how much like how we use that core costs because they know that that can be, or you're putting lots of money into it. Well, not necessarily lots of money, but um, you're putting money sort of into a central pot there that they can't control. I don't know if that answers your question.
It sounds like there may not be a direct one-to-one, but there seems like a lot of overlap. If
Yeah,
it's project specific, that sounds like restricted funding that you can only spend on that project.
yeah,
But then core costs, you also mentioned that some bids would have a percentage allowance for core costs. So then you potentially have restricted and unrestricted funding. Okay, there's
yeah.
probably some overlap there, but yeah, thanks for the help.
Yeah, yeah, it can. It's I try and stay away from the accounting bit of how you do all of that bit with the accountants. That's to me, I'm like, here's the figures. Accountant, can you figure out how this works? Or another note, and I'm sure for the people who've not written a bid before in your life, when it comes to um accounting at the end of the year, make sure that you've got an accountant who understands working with the third sector, working with the charity sector, because not all of them have that experience, and so they need to understand the difference between restricted and unrestricted. They need to understand the difference between putting something in one year and putting things in the other year, and how that works in the third sector, because it's not necessarily the same as in the corporate sector. So quiz your accountant before you hire them. I've I've in the past worked with an accountant who didn't really understand the difference, and gosh, it was such a nightmare to unpick at the end at the end of the financial year. And accounting is not, for me at least, not fun at the best of times. So make sure that you find an accountant who really, really knows how a charity accounting or third sector accounting works.
There's a whole thing called I think it's called the SORP. Is that right? The charity SORP. It's basically guidelines for accounting on charities. It's a right riveting read.
I'm sure it is. It sounds amazingly wonderful to read. Any other questions from anyone else? I struggle to believe that I covered enough stuff that you have no questions about all of those things, but there is more time. There is more time. There will be other pauses for questions. If everyone's sure, we're good to go. Okay, cool. Right here then. Onwards. If I can get my mouse to work, which I can't. Oh, there it is. Okay, G. G is for governance. Um, I'm sure anyone who's done a bit of research about different funds will know that as soon as you start looking at the criteria that different funders have, you very quickly start to come across, we only fund charities, or they don't necessarily put it in quite so stark terms. They're like, our funds are for charities who do this, that, and the other. And that makes you go, oh, they only fund charities. Some grant making organisations will fund community interest companies, but not all. Some will fund constituted community groups, but not all. Um, I know of almost none that fund sole traders. So if you are a sole trader, but you want to put together a project, you either need to become a constituted community group or something like that, or become a partner with an organisation that does fit with the governance criteria of that particular funder. Very, very important to be completely clear on the governance structures of the funds, the governance structures required for the funds that you're applying for. Quite a lot of the time, well, some of the time, you want it to be quite a lot of the time because it's not necessarily transparent, but if in doubt, ask. They will usually have some kind of requirement, particularly for like community interest companies, that you have at least 3 unrelated directors and things like that. I know one organisation got caught out by that. They got all the way to the end of an application process, and then the funder said, you don't have enough unrelated directors on your board formally registered on Companies House at the time at which we made our decision. She had one, the CEO had, they were in the process of doing all of that kind of stuff, but they hadn't actually done it at the point at which that conversation was had. And therefore, even though the funder had wanted to award them the funding, they couldn't because they didn't meet the governance criteria. So always be very, very careful about what governance structure you need. I've also had a few conversations with various people lately about coming to me saying, I want to turn my group into an organisation. What kind of organisation should I go for? And my research and my advice is always, well, one of the things that you really should consider is what's your income generation plan? We're going to come on to that in a second. And if it's to be reliant largely on grants, which I don't advise, again, more on that in a second, then you need to know that whether or not the kinds of funds that you think are your best bets, the closest fit with your organisation, what are the governance structures that you are, because you don't want to register as a community interest company and then find that actually all of the funds or most of the funds that you want to apply to don't fund community interest companies. So think very, very carefully about whether your governance structure fits with the funds. Do your research with the funder, do some Googling. I should note as well that not all funders have websites. Some of them you only really know about by asking around. We'll talk a little bit more about how to find other ways to find funders a little bit later on. And so sometimes it will take a couple of phone calls to people to just double check what their criteria are, both for the project itself and for you as an organisation. What do you need to hit? Some of them also have restrictions about how much income you have had in the last financial year. Some of them want you to have more, some of them want you to have less. Um, um, so it's entirely dependent, always important to do that research or ask the question if it's not clear. H is for help. It's so valuable to get another pair of eyes on your writing. And, this is the same if you're writing an essay in school or college or university or for any kind of qualification. If you're writing your CV, your cover letter, it's really valuable to get another pair of eyes on that, whether that's from a colleague or even from a friend. I think it's quite valuable to get another pair of eyes on what you've written from someone who has absolutely nothing to do with the work that you do. Because they can see the question that the funder has asked, and there'll be a variety of questions. They can see the question, they can read your answer, and if they still have questions at the end of it, they're like, well, that doesn't actually, I'm not clear on what that means. Like, will the funder know what that means? Sometimes the answer is yes, sometimes the answer is, or I'm not sure, maybe I need to be a bit clearer of that. But another pair of eyes, once you've been really, really, I personally can get really in the weeds of, this answer is clearly perfect, but I need another person to read it and poke holes in it and give me feedback in the nicest possible way, because it's all going to add to the strength of what you're putting together. I is for income generation strategy. So as I said before, it can be a precarious position to be in, being entirely reliant um, on grants because it's so competitive at the moment. It's so incredibly competitive. Again, I'm going to come on to more of that in a second. Um, so it's a good idea to have a diverse income sort of portfolio, different ways in which you're going to fund the work that you do, so that you're not exclusively reliant on grants. Because I know organisations who've been exclusively reliant on grants, and then they've not secured a few grants that they really wanted, and it's caused them to fold. So it is very important to think very carefully about where your income is going to come from for the work that you're going to do, and try as much as you can to not be exclusively reliant on grants, because you never know what's going to happen. Um, J is for joining mailing lists and local networks. For the people there's seven of you in this room who have applied for funds in the past before. Could you pop in the comments where you found the various funds so that other people can get a sense of where you're hearing about the different funds that are available? Some of it you can find through Googling, through looking on a database, but another really valuable way of getting hold of that kind of information is identifying what are the funds that are most relevant to your work and your organisation, and joining their mailing lists. And then whenever they post a new fund, whenever a new fund becomes available, they will put it in their newsletter and they will put it out, or they'll put in out a special edition that tells you this fund has opened. And then you can be really quick off the mark, because a lot of funds will be open. A lot of funds are open on a rolling basis, which means they don't have an end date. But there are also an awful lot that have a very strict cut-off point. It might just be a month, it might be 2 months. Um, Another quick quiz, and I really hope I can see the comments to find out this answer. In fact, because I don't think that I can, um, please do unmute yourself and shout out. There is there's a fund called the Greenhall Foundation that at the beginning of March of this year, they opened a fund, and they said they would only accept the first 150 applications. And I think they told everyone what the questions would be beforehand. I heard about this sort of through fundraisers that I know, like on LinkedIn and things like that. Can I hear your guesses about how long you think that fund was open for before they reached 150 applications and closed it? I've had various answers from this in previous ones, but who can throw your numbers out there, throw out your guesses. Go on, David, I know you want to.
I'll put it in the chat. Same day? Was it closed same day, opened?
It was closed the same day it opened. Anna, could you read me out any other answers that are
Yeah,
in the
we've got
chat?
5 hours, less than
5
an
hours,
hour.
less than an hour. What else?
5 hours is another one.
Sure. Well, I can tell you it is less than an hour. It was 18 minutes.
Gosh.
Yes. 18 minutes. And various people I know who put in funding applications for that said the website was down for the first 10 minutes. There was so much interest that they crashed the website, all trying to log on at 9 o'clock or whenever it opened. And by 18 minutes past the hour, applications were closed because they'd received their full 180. I really feel, obviously, for all of the people who wrote an application and were ready to submit and they didn't even get to submit it. But it just goes to show how incredibly competitive it is right now, and how many funders are just completely inundated with applications. And this is why paying attention to the criteria is really important, because you don't want to waste your time putting in an application unless you are absolutely sure that you can make a really compelling case of why you meet that criteria. And it's also a sign of why it's really important to know about those things, because I had no idea this fund was opening because I've not been watching that fund. I'm not on their mailing list. I didn't know about these kinds of things. But identifying who those potential funders are and watching what's going on, and having your ear to the ground means that you have a much stronger chance of being able to put in an application. I don't know of other funders who've had that same cut-off point since then, but there are also an awful lot of funders who will they might put a line on their websites when they have got a deadline. Just as the same, you'll see the same in the jobs market, and people People I know who've been applying for jobs and saying, oh, I wanted to put in an application for this job. It said the deadline was this date, but they closed it earlier because they said they had so many applications. It's much the same in funding. There are some funders who are closing early because they've just received so many applications that they're overwhelmed and they just think we could spend the rest of our year assessing all these applications. So being able to be quick off the mark is really, really valuable just in case you find yourself in that position. K is for know your stuff and show it. Um, when you're writing a funding application, you are essentially building a case. You're making an argument for your work and why your work is needed, why it's valuable. And funders really want to know why your work is valuable, but you also need to be able to evidence why it is valuable. So if there is space in the word count, it's really valuable to do your research. I mean, you know a lot of stuff. You'll see it in your community. You'll be able to see the social issues arising that you want to fix, and that's why you're doing the work that you're doing. But until you but that anecdotal evidence will hit the mark for maybe some funders if they've only got a really, really small word count in which for you to be able to express it, but others might need you to be able to back up, or I think quite a lot need you to be able to back up what you're seeing. And there's always a lot of research about a lot of things out there. It doesn't take much Googling to find out things like stats about the demographic that you're looking at, local policy that's influencing, national policy that's influencing the groups that you're trying to support and the social issue that you're trying to address. You might want to do for a bigger fund a PESTEL analysis. Like if you're applying for Reaching Communities funding, it's a good idea to do a PESTEL analysis, which is, I have written this down just in case I forget, analysing the political, economic, social, technological, local, and environmental um, sort of circumstances around the social issue that you're trying to address. Because then that gives you a good idea of what kinds of things you might want to pull on when you're making the case of why your work is needed. There'll be an awful lot of stuff that you really like, you see it, but you also need to be able to back it up so that the funder can see that it is a real, genuine problem that is recognised by other people, and it's not just something that you feel is a good idea. And have, faith in the things that you are seeing. It doesn't diminish it in any way whatsoever, but having that evidence from other sources helps to build the case that you're making in your funding application. L is for learning. Last one before we open for questions again. Whether or not your bid is successful, but particularly if it isn't, it is always worth trying to get hold of some feedback on your application. I try and encourage people to also try and get feedback if their bid is successful. And I know someone who did that just a couple of weeks ago, and she said she got awarded some funding, and she said it was really actually very valuable to have feedback on an application that was successful because she knows there's various things in that application that she can then lift and repurpose for future applications. Like they say, you articulated this really, really well. Um, maybe this bit could have been stronger, but this was really, really good. And vice versa. If you have an unsuccessful application, um, some funders will give you feedback, but again, it's a bit like the jobs market. Sometimes they're overwhelmed and they just say, we can't give feedback on each individual application. There were just too many. Like again, speaking to a funder friend yesterday, she said, please tell people sometimes it is absolutely nothing to do with you. It's no reflection on your project. It is simply that it just wasn't your day. There were just other applications that just slightly pipped you to the post. But using that feedback when you can get it can help make your application stronger next time. So always be learning, always be looking out for those learning opportunities to help build your bid writing capabilities and enable you to be able to build up a good sort of a good set of strong ways of articulating what you're doing that you can then plug into other future applications. So, questions again. Anyone please do put your hands up and share. Again, I will remind people, if you don't want to be on the recording, then please don't stop that from you asking your question. We can just cut you out if that's what you want. Is there anything in the comments, Anna?
Yeah, just a question about the pestle analysis.
Mm-hmm.
So what does pestle stand for, and what is the analysis?
Sure. PESTLE stands for political, economic, social, technological, local, and environmental. And so that analysis might look like taking each of those things in turn and looking at the evidence around, like, what are the political issues that your cohort that you're aiming at are facing. Like, what is there particular policy that's having an impact on them? Particular communities might be really being affected by the political climate at the moment, that's impacting how they like the things that happen to them in society. And the same for economic questions. Are there particular economic policies or economic situations that are really, really affecting them? Cost of living crisis is, obviously very much acknowledged as a thing that most people are facing, but it'll be hitting other people harder than others for probably various social and political reasons. But analysing each of those words in turn and how that particular situation, how a particular system impacts the group that you're trying to support through your project, gives you a well-rounded picture of the ways in which they're being affected by the world around them right now. And if you, for a funding application, you might not necessarily, like, you won't want to use all of that, but it gives you some idea of what are the various different things that you might want to pull on that build your case. And more broadly, a pestle analysis is useful for your organisation because it gives you a really strong insight into the group of people that you're wanting to support, and it might well inform the kinds of questions that you want to ask them about the kind of work that you might need to do, like opportunities that your organisation can create, things that your organisation could do to help to address certain issues that they might be facing maybe on a local level. So pestle analysis has various different applications. For funding purposes, it's a way of helping you to understand your cohort better and be able to argue the case of why your work will help to address certain issues that they're facing.
Thanks, Abby. There's another question as well. Just to share a little bit more information on who typical funders are. So does it range from large organisations like the lottery to small regional funders? Just some sense of who the funders are and maybe what, how they relate to the funds they offer.
Mm-hmm. Um, it's a difficult question to answer in that there are literally thousands upon thousands of funders across the UK. Some of them are very small family trusts with very, very sort of limited scopes. And the lottery is the biggest, most well-known one, and they have various different types of funds, some of which are on a rolling basis, some of which are on a sort of a smaller. They will fund a smaller number of people. They have a set amount that they will give out in a year, and they have a set application period. The most common one that I know of that lots of people apply to is Lottery Awards for All, which is funding for anywhere between £300 and £20,000. And I know a lot of people go for that, and so it is very, very, very popular. And then lots of people also use reaching applications to the Reaching Communities Fund to scale up their organisation further, because that's larger amounts of money. I think up to 200,000, if I remember rightly off the top of my head. But then you've also got organisations like your local infrastructure organisations might have smaller funds here and there. A lot of them get some funding from the local council, which might enable them to give out £1,000 for this, that, and the other. Entirely variable depending on like the time and what they've got available and what they're hearing from the community about what people need. Um, and then you also sometimes you might want to go down instead a crowdfunding, fundraising kind of route to be able to get your funds, where you're actually asking members of the public. It's a different, completely different prospect to bid writing, but it is another way of getting small amounts of funding, or even large amounts of funding if you know really put your time and effort into it. And then you also have organisations like Flourish. Where possible, every so often across the course of a year, people who've connected with Flourish will know that we run what we call community soup events, which is an opportunity for people to get seed funding, sort of no strings attached, like we don't have reporting expectations about it. You turn up to a community venue, you get some food, you have a lovely free dinner, opportunity to chat and network with other people, and then people will variously stand up in front of the room and say, this is who I am, this is who my organisation is. I want, you know, if I had £300, I would use it for this, and I think it would have this kind of impact. And then literally the people in the room vote on who, which project they want to fund through an anonymous voting system. And then that person walks away at the end of the night with some seed funding. So there are all kinds of different ways in which you can apply for funding. Obviously, we're talking about written ones here, and they can be, you can have, it depends where you're plugged into, where you find those different kinds of opportunities. There are a lot of foundations which have endowments that have come from somewhere specific. Lottery money comes from lottery players at the end of the day. There are also a huge number of foundations where their wealth originates in industrial activity that happened many decades ago, a lot of the time. You also get various ones. I've heard of one that opened just last year. You know, it does happen, but it's always worth keeping an eye on the landscape because it is constantly changing about which funders are there and which ones are really active and how much money they're giving out. Various funders, like I knew various people applied to Lloyd's Foundation, and then I think it was them who put a hold on giving out funding for a while they worked out what their strategy was. Um, and so it's always changing. It is always changing. Lottery is, I do think, the most popular one, but there is a whole range of funds, right from your local infrastructure organisation or organisations like Flourish giving out smaller amounts of money, right through to getting hundreds of thousands. But the bigger organisations that are more likely to give out those kinds of amounts of money might be, other than lottery, might be, I don't know, Paul Hamlyn Foundation, Esme Fairbairn. Can't think off the top of my head who else. A lot of the time they have someone's name attached to them. Yeah, huge range and always changing. So always worth keeping your ear to the ground so that you see which organisations are emerging, what's open, what's closed.
Yeah, people have added some examples just to illustrate that, including the SPA and the co-op. So retail stores that do local funding. I know the co-op does that anyway as part of their sort of mission, and also our local LIO, so Trafford Community Collective. Someone received a grant brokered by them. So yeah.
Brilliant. Yeah, and like Greg's Foundation, lots of corporates also have, as part of their corporate social responsibility, they'll have that arm. Sometimes it's like, I think with co-op, they'll have like a chosen local charity and people vote for who gets the funding. Co-op members get to vote for who gets the funding. I think that's right. Don't quote me on it. But there are various different ways in which you can get small amounts.
Tesco do the same, don't they, with tokens? They certain things, but yeah.
So yeah, keep your ear to the ground, and you never know. And also another way of getting funding that might not necessarily mean bid writing is sometimes you can build a partnership with a local organisation, local corporation who wants to do corporate social responsibility, social value stuff, and so they might be able to give you some funding if you broke a good relationship with them. And it might be in-kind funding, might be like they're giving you access to venues or staff expertise, voluntary time, things like that. That all counts as a form of funding. But of course, that kind of stuff won't be advertised anywhere. It's entirely dependent on you building a relationship with that company and seeing what happens, see what comes of it. Okay, shall we move on? We're about halfway through the alphabet. Um, M is for media. A lot of funders will want to see that you exist outside of the piece of paper or the pixels that they're looking at on their screen. So they will sometimes ask you to put on your social media handles, your website. I'm always having conversations with people about whether or not they need a website. You don't necessarily need a website in order to run your organization. They are very, very expensive to maintain, and also to build in the first place. But having some kind of media presence enables you to show, images of the work that you're doing, really brings it to life. And so if a funder's, having a little look at what you've put on your funding application, looking at your social media handles, worth keeping them up to date, and having them ready to share. N is for not going too big or too small. I'm just going to flick forward through to the next slide and hope that I remember to come back to O. This shows you sort of some funding trajectories. Kind of upsets me that those boxes aren't level with one another. That's my bad. Showing you sort of the different kinds of funds that a social enterprise in particular might draw on. Say social enterprise because stage one is like unlimited unlimited as a funder, a school of social enterprise. There are various different places where you might get a couple of £100, maybe £1,000. And then in the early stages, you're going for those small amounts of money, but as the organisation develops a track record, which we'll talk about again a little bit later on, it then gives you sort of more power to your elbow to be able to then apply for larger amounts of money because you've been able to demonstrate we can manage this money and run these kinds of projects. Look, here are the projects that we've done in the past, and this helps build our evidence for this next bit of work that we're going to do. And so over the time, as your organisation sort of grows and becomes more established, there are other funds that then might be more attainable for you as an organisation. Some organisations just want to stay in that sort of early stage, just running on, small amounts of funding, and that's fine. Others want to grow, also fine. Like it's entirely dependent. But there are different sort of sizes of different kinds of funders, which kind of answers some of the question that was asked just now. But you'll see also on here there's various sort of more like commissioned opportunities that provide you with some form of funding that require you to write some kind of a funding bid. But this is also quite Greater Manchester specific, so bear that in mind for anyone who's not in Greater Manchester. So yes, some idea of you might from very, very beginning, if you're just right at the start of your organisation, it might be a complete waste of your time to go straight for I want 200k for this project. But it would be attainable to apply for, say, £3,000 from an organisation, from a funder. But equally, if you're an organisation that receives already large amounts of funding, is very well established, has a lot of staff to cover, it might not be worth your time writing an application for something for just £500 because the amount of staff time that it takes them away from doing income generating activities of higher value. The time that they spend writing that funding application and dealing with it and servicing the reporting contracts, like it's not financially worth it. You might make a loss as an organization going for those small amounts of funding. So weigh up where you are as an organization and what is worth your while. Don't be afraid to be ambitious, of course, but bear in mind that you need to build up that track record in order to make it worthwhile going for those larger amounts of funding. Back to O. O is for all content. I said a little bit of this earlier, specifically around using your feedback from previous applications. But even if you don't manage to get feedback from old applications, you don't have to start with a blank piece of paper every single time you write an application. There will be things in there, you spent time writing a lovely way of describing who your organisation is and what it does. And that's evergreen content that you can sort of rehash and reuse for other future applications, that can be really useful. Just because it wasn't successful in one place doesn't mean that it's not really useful content that you can reuse. It's just always important to think about how I tailor this for the next application. And is all of this information relevant for this different fund that I'm applying for? And making sure it's still very much tailored to that different fund's criteria and priorities and all the rest of it. So don't feel like you have to throw everything out of the window and start anew every time, but also make sure that you're tailoring everything you're writing every time. That's funding trajectories. P is for policies and procedures. Some funders will ask you to attach certain policies, like your safeguarding policy, or maybe your equalities, your diversity and equal opportunities policy with their application. Some of them might want to see those policies after they've sort of provisionally awarded your funding as part of, then they've got it on record, they know that you've got those things. It's part of funders helping to manage the risk associated with giving out funding. They want to know that you're going to use it, use the funding in a way that adheres with, the principles of looking after your populations that you're working with, and that you have all of those policies and procedures in place, and you've really thought about what happens if a safeguarding incident happens. And what does staff know what to do? Are people up to date with the kinds of training that they need? Are they going to adhere to data protection law? Have you borne that in mind when you put together your data protection policy? If you don't have those policies, they're pretty easy to get hold of, like draft versions on the internet or from other organisations that you know. Your local infrastructure organisation also should be able to help you lay your hands on some good policies. And the procedures will be sort of dependent on your organisation and who's there and who it makes sense to do what and escalate what to. But have those policies and procedures on hand, just in case you might get asked for them. You should have them anyway, but you might get asked for them as part of the funding application. Q is for quotes. Part of bringing your application to life involves being able to show the people who are beneficiaries of the project. And so it's also worth gathering quotes once you've received funding, quotes from people who have been positively affected by the project, or who've contributed to the learning of the project, to be able to quote them in your reporting as you go through the course of the project. But quotes also can be, if you've got the space in the word count, put in some quotes to show, these people are real, and here are the things that they're saying. And when you're making the case for why this project is needed, they might then, you might have a quote from a local person that you've spoken to who says, I've been experiencing this particular kind of problem, and I think it'd be really valuable if. So gather them as much as you can, because they're useful in all kinds of different ways, but sometimes there is a space for you to be able to use them in funding applications as well. R is for reapply. Just because you've been unsuccessful with one funder one time, as long as it's not because you don't meet their criteria at all in any way, shape, or form. A lot of funders will also encourage you to not be put off by not being successful. As I said earlier, sometimes it is just not your day. Sometimes there's just been another application that was just marginally stronger on that particular occasion. But that doesn't mean that you will never be successful with that funder. Oh, I should mention the Four at this point in time. The Four is a very, very, very popular fund. They have a really good feedback process, from what I understand. Lots of people reapply to the Four because it's so competitive. They have a really good process in that you just register your interest in the first instance. Like stage one is literally just between this date and this date. You put in your name, your organisation, I don't know, maybe what kind of organisation you are, and some contact details. And then they pick at random a certain number of people to put in a full application. So they're one to sort of bear in mind that they've got a really good, robust process that people seem to respond really, really well to. I don't know whether or not you can reapply once you've received funding from them, but they are really good in terms of not making you go through a really, really onerous process unless there's a really good chance that you might actually get the funding, which I really like about them. So yes, do think about reapplying, even if you've been unsuccessful. And some funds will allow you to reapply, even if you have been. In fact, a lot of funds will allow you to reapply if you have been successful. The lottery does a lot of repeat funding, but as I understand it from having spoken with a funding manager, the more times you apply, the less likely, I believe, um, the less likely you are to get that funding again because no funder wants you to be entirely reliant on them. So bear that in mind, and if in doubt, speak to the funding manager and see what they say. Any questions about those things? And let me know if it pops up in the comments. So do feel free to put up your hands and come off mute.
It's not a question, but it's just sort of observation that someone was successful for a co-op local community fund and it was really helpful, but there was a long lead time from application to award, approximately 18 months. So factoring in that sort of lead time in terms of applying and then actually receiving the funds.
That's a really, really great point. And sometimes it's not clear how long that lead time is. Lottery's quite good at being transparent about that, like awards for all. I think it used to be 12 weeks from application to decision. It's currently 16 weeks, if I remember rightly. I think it's something like 40 weeks, maybe for each communities. And it's just like different amounts of time. Some funders are more transparent about that. Some funders will say if we got a set amount of time between, you can apply between this date and this date. After this point, we will aim to get back to everyone by this date. My experience has been in the last couple of years, funders are really, really struggling to meet those dates that they say we'll tell everyone by this date. And so I am always aiming to be quite flexible in my assumptions about when we will actually find out whether or not we've got the funding, because if they're overwhelmed, it's going to take them longer to make their way through all of the applications that they need to assess. David.
Yeah, hi. So the question on the policies one, I'm kind of getting some information that a lot of funders are becoming overwhelmed with the amount of applications that they're receiving. And then looking at these policies, um, what I'm thinking of, would they even have time to even review these policies? I've just got this imagination in my head. If I submitted single blank page documents marked, you know, safeguarding procedure or something that actually nobody would ever read it because they don't have time to do it. I just wanted to get some your thoughts on that. Do you actually really have to have all of this documentation?
I think you should have that documentation like as a matter of course. As an organization, if you're working with vulnerable people, you should have a safeguarding policy in place. And I would always advise having those policies even before like just as part of the general running and setting up of your organization. Whether or not all funders read the policies that get submitted, I honestly don't know.
Yeah.
I would really love to think that they do, but I also appreciate they're probably quite slim on time, so maybe they might just give a quick glance over it. I would really hope that they would pick up if you submitted a blank piece of paper that just said safeguarding policy at the top. Um,
TBC.
and I don't recommend testing that theory.
That's a fair
Might prove
comment.
to be a waste of your time. But always have
It's,
those policies in place. Yeah, any other questions before we move on? No? Okay. Rightio. S. S is for Snoop. Um, it's often a good idea to have some sense of who your quote unquote competitors are, even like in a nice way, other organizations who are doing similar kinds of things to you. Because if they're applying to the same kinds of funds, you want to be able to articulate really clearly in your funding application how you're different from one another. And why it is that if they fund that organisation, it doesn't preclude them from funding your organisation because they're not funding the same thing in the same place twice. Um, also, another sort of good reason for getting a sense of who your competitors are is some of them put who their funders are on their websites or on their social medias. In fact, some funders are really, really keen for you to publicly thank them for giving you their for them giving you their money, whatever your position on that sort of ethically in terms of like the power dynamics between funders and funding recipients is concerned is a different question altogether. But it is it's well worth knowing that sometimes people are required by the funder to be transparent, or maybe they just want to publicly thank the people who are giving them money, and they put that information out in the public domain. That tells you that that funder is interested in funding similar sorts of things to what you're funding and what you're wanting to do, and therefore you might want to consider putting an application. They've, that organization sort of done some research that you can then sort of piggyback off and then apply to that funder as well. But also be mindful of setting yourself apart from them as an organisation. T is for track record. I've said a little bit about track records already when I was talking about funding trajectories and not going too big or too small. One of the things that funders who are giving out larger amounts of money will be looking for is evidence that you are going to be able to do what you say that you are going to be able to do. And so if you have existed, like Flourish has existed for somewhere 10 to 15 years, I'm not sure, I can't remember, but a long time, received various different kinds of funding for various sort of like projects sort of evolving on one another. And there's a very clear sort of line of recognition between, we've managed projects of this size with this kind of budget on this kind of staffing structure, and this then evidences that we'll then be able to do something of that nature over here, or on a slightly bigger scale, but we can evidence that we've done these various different things that then build confidence from a funder's perspective in our ability to do what we say that we're going to do. And this is one of the reasons why organizations tend to start with small amounts of money and then build their way up, because it helps you to, you're not going for something that a funder's going to say, yes, you say this, but do you actually have the infrastructure in place? Do you actually have the right people in place? Do you have the right policies and procedures in place? All of that kind of stuff. But it helps them to see why you are a trusted pair of hands to do the thing that you say you're going to do. U is for using data and statistics. This is sort of a bit of a building on the showing that you know your stuff point. Being able to evidence, the local census says that this population that we're looking to reach is this kind of size. Sometimes that's a useful thing to be able to throw in. X% of people in this particular group of people who we want to support are experiencing this particular kind of social issue. Being able to use what's the word, quantitative as well as qualitative data can be really, really useful. And then once you've received funding, gathering data and statistics as you go helps you to be able to evidence the success of the work that you've done, or maybe what didn't work as well. And then it also helps to build your track record, which helps you with then future applications. So here are, I don't expect you to remember this, but do feel free. I will share these slides later, but also do feel free to take a photo of this slide. Here's some examples of different policies and reports that you might use to evidence need for the kinds of things. So we've got various different policy organisations here, organisations that put out the kinds of policies that might show what you want to do. Mostly sort of public sector type organisations, but don't forget about think tanks as well. They also will be doing research that might have some data statistics, it might have qualitative stuff, it might have some sort of like academic thinking that evidences the work that you want to do, IPPR, SEUK. And then you've got also those organisations that do more like market intelligence type stuff, statistics and data. Harvard Business Review does a lot of research as well, and they have various articles that are also publicly available. Most of these have publicly available reports. Some of them are paywalled, but it's always worth having a look. And these, if in doubt, have a little look at these ones. Obviously, Greater Manchester Combined Authority only applies to people in Greater Manchester, but they have various strategies that they will publish that you can then draw on, especially when you're applying for a local fund, to say this fits with the local strategy. This will sort of bolster what the NHS is currently trying to achieve in this particular area of need. if you can draw the line between what people are trying to, other people are trying to achieve on a policy level and what you're trying to do, again, it helps to build your case of how this isn't sort of going against what other people are doing, which makes it more likely to be successful. And of course, it'll be very different depending on which organisations have the most sort of relevant information to you. Will be incredibly different depending on the proposal that you're putting forward, like the thematic area that you're working in, your geography, the sector that you're serving, whether it's health or environment or well-being, fitness, whatever it is that you're focusing on. They will all be different, so don't feel like you need to look at absolutely everything. Just pick on a couple of things that would be useful, that would help to support what you're doing. And then we are very, very close to the end of the alphabet, as you will see. And the way that I fit into the sort of latter end of the alphabet, letters become slightly more tenuous, but that's because when I originally wrote up this list, there are about 10 things that could have gone under R. But here we are. I do succeed, I promise. V is for value, and we're talking about social value in particular here. And it's good to be able to evidence why your work is important. I know I've said this a million different times already, but in the sense of measuring your social value, as you go through a project that you've done, maybe if you've piloted something sort of for lesser amounts of money, you gather the evidence that shows the value of your work. And this might be the financial value of your work, like the money that is saved by, say, the NHS for you doing such and such a kind of intervention, or it might be the local social economic value that you put in by, we're going to, in our project, we're going to use just local suppliers. We're just going to use social enterprise like Flourish tries to do this as much as we possibly can. When we're putting on an event, we will try and use a venue that's a social enterprise or a charity. We'll try and use caterers who are local startups and all of those kinds of things. And that all adds to the social value of the work that we do, because it's keeping the funders' money in the local economy, investing in other social enterprises. And then there's also other non-financial value that your work is bringing, that it's useful for you to be able to gather the evidence for as the project sort of progresses, and then be able to plug that into your future bids, like the environmental impact of the work that you're doing, how it's positively affecting your local environment or particular social issues. So always be gathering information on social value of your work, because it helps to build the case for future work that you might do. And also it helps, it's useful for you then be able to put together a social value report every so often to be able to go, this is why we're very well worth investing in, which might help with looking for commissioned opportunities, other kinds of things like that. W is for word count. Not much to say on this, other than there's usually a word count on an application, because funders don't want you to be writing a 6,000 word essay, although I have read a funding form recently that did actually require, when I added up all of the questions, 6,000 words worth of answers. They don't necessarily expect you to use all of the word count available, but the word count for each question that is there in a bid gives you some indication of the depth of answer that they're expecting. So if there's just 150 words, then that gives you a handful of sentences to express something very straightforward. They're not expecting war and peace. They're not expecting you to be delving into the research about this kind of thing that they're asking you a question about. But if they're asking a 500-word question, then they're looking for a lot more detail. So pay close attention to the word count and use them as much as you possibly can. Don't go over them, because a lot of forms, when you submit them online, they will just cut off the end of the questions. And so cut off the end of your answer. And so when you're writing your answer, make sure that you are sticking within the word count. Sometimes they use a character count, which I find really painful, because I've no idea what 600 characters looks like, where I've got an idea of what 600 words looks like. But be mindful of word counts and stick to them. X is for examining funders' past decisions. I'm going to show you now a portal. If you can open up a window open up the internet and Google 360 Giving Grant Nav, and you'll see it on a second in a page. 360 Giving is a platform that's sort of emerged, I think more recently than Grant Finder, where a bunch of more progressive funders have started putting in, they want to be more transparent. They've come together and decided they want to be more transparent about where their money is going. Because although you also find some of this information on their individual websites, funders can often be really good at saying, here are some projects that we're currently funding or we have funded in the past. And it's worth sort of having a look over those. It gives you some idea of the kinds of things they're interested in. But 360 Giving is a platform where you can actually search through a database of a lot of information about where various funders' money has gone. I will caveat it by saying it's not every funder by any stretch of the imagination. There will be a lot of funders who aren't on there. But that doesn't mean that it's not a really valuable starting point that is free to access. It's pretty intuitive about how to use it, and it gives you some sort of really good starting point. I used this just yesterday to look for funders for a particular project that I'm supporting in Wythenshawe, and they're not sure where to find the funders. So I thought I'd do some preliminary research, and I did this. Went into 360 Giving Grant Nav. Should I now realise, should have flicked forward to the next slide so you could see what it's called, because that's a weird thing to remember. So you'll see in 360 Giving, you've got a search bar, and you just literally put in some sort of keywords related to your project that you want to get funded, or to your business if you're looking for something a bit more general. And then you see here that I searched for ESOL food as an example. I just chose those keywords because I knew there was an ESOL project who were looking for some funding. And then if you hit search, then it'll just bring up, you can see that there were 74,422 grants uploaded, where the data was uploaded to this system, that had the keywords ESOL and food in them, totaling over £8 million. Which is phenomenal. And there's 246 funders who gave gave funding towards that kind of project. And then, obviously, that's not necessarily useful information to have in and of itself. But if you, oh, my mouse has stopped working again. If you then scroll down the page, you'll then start to see each individual project that has been uploaded, the title of the project, maybe a brief project summary. Obviously, the second one, they've not given particularly brilliant project summary or title, but maybe that's just not what the funder needed at that point in time. This funding, this database goes back many, many, many years. There's a lot of historic data has been uploaded. I tend to only filter for most recent application, a most recent funding award in the last couple of years, because various funds open and close. Various funders have been closing over the last handful of years. Various funders are also talking about spending out their funds. So it's always worth, from my perspective, I tend to only go for the most recent ones. But out of interest, you can look at historic donations. So you can click into each of these individually and go have a little nosy at that project. But what's really valuable is you can see how much they received, where they are, who was the funder, and who was the organisation. And here's some more of them. I then, I use the filters down the left doing this to select just Northwest organisations, because obviously I'm interested in Northwest organisations, given that Flourish mainly supports Greater Manchester. And then that changed the numbers that we had. And then right back at the top of the page, you'll see that you can either put it in table view, which is what we see here, where it's sort of just a list, but you can also export the data, which if you're an Excel nerd like me, that's a wonderful thing, because I'll export the file and then hopefully this will mean something to some people, but I know it's Excel nerdery that sort of doesn't necessarily chime with everyone. I then use a pivot table I generate a pivot table from the data that's there, and then I drag across who the funder is and how many funds they've got, and then I've got an idea of, oh, if I put in this particular keyword, this number, this is the funder who funds who's given the largest number of funds, the largest number of awards to projects that have those keywords in them. and it sort of gives me an idea of then who to then spend some more time. I then sort of then it gives me an order of organisations to then start doing some research and going, is that fund still open? Is it relevant to the specific project that I'm looking at? It just gives you a starting point. And sometimes it might not come up with anything particularly useful, but if you're starting from like point zero and you haven't yet had a chance to go speak to your local infrastructure organisation or go to the library and look through Grant Finder or Googling, you're not really sure where to start, 360 Giving Grant Nav is really useful, just giving you a starting point. There's some real gems of information in here, and it's pretty sort of intuitive. You can just, if you wanted to, just scroll through the list here and click through them. You don't have to export it and play around with the data. But there's various different options here about how you can use that information to inform what you do, depending on sort of the level of depth that you want to go into. So I really hope that that's a useful tool to know about. And
Can I just jump in with a question? Because hopefully it's
sure,
answered it, but maybe the person. Do funders post who's been successful in applications? So you've kind of answered it with this
yeah.
portal, but also some do give that reporting themselves, don't they?
Yes, yes, some of them do. Not obviously not every funder is on here. And so like not everyone is completely transparent about all of everyone that they funded. But they will also, a lot of them on their websites, might say, here's some examples of the funds we've given out. Some of them will have only a restricted number of grants that they're going to give within any given period. And they might then spotlight every single one of them, but that's only if they've got a relatively small number, like if they've got like, I don't know, 12 projects that they're funding. They said, we're only going to fund 12 projects this year. Then they might actually show you all of those projects on their website. But 360 Giving, as I said, it's not every funder, but it is a lot of funders. It's a good number of funders all across all of the UK. And so this sort of, and you can see in here, it shows you how much they've given to each individual project. So you can filter by all kinds of things. You can filter by where you are, when the funding was given, how much sort of what bracket of funding. You're giving actually, can I say? Yeah, I can see in the corner of this bottom left corner of here, you can see the sizes of awards that have been given out. So if you're only interested in going for, so like the smaller end of the scale, because you're just sort of starting out, or you just want a little bit of project funding just for something that's not going to cost an awful lot, you can just filter out to those smaller ones. And those ones sometimes might be a bit easier to get because it might be a smaller funder. It's easier for them to it's less of a decision for them to give out £300 than it is to give out £50,000. So I think the 360 Grant Nav is a really useful, free to access, transparent tool, even if just as a starting point for doing your research on who might be interested in funding your project, because it can be daunting getting started and trying to find the right thing for your organisation. Um, Y is for you can do this. I know I've made this potentially sound quite daunting because there's a lot of sort of hints and tips that you can throw out there. But at the end of the day, funders want to give out their money. That's why they exist. They want to give out their money to good causes. The main thing to remember is your main job when you're putting in an application for a bid is simply to show them why they should fund your project and why they should care about it as much as you do. The various hints and tips that I've given you over the course of this morning hopefully will show you sort of ways into that, ways to find those various different funds that you might go for, ways that you might sort of inveigle yourself into those funders' hearts, ways that you might evidence the work that you're doing. But at the end of the day, they want to hear your voice, and you absolutely can do this. The first fund that I applied for was for a community food growing project around the corner from my house with a small community group that I became part of. It was with Greater Manchester Police and Crimes Commissioner's Office, as it was then, and it was for £1,500 for various tools and things. And it's the first bid I've ever written, and I got it. Well, we got it. We got it, not just me. And it felt like I'd actually won the lottery. I was so thrilled to get this £1,500 because it meant that we could do so much stuff. And then over the course of the years, I've applied for different amounts of funding, ranging from I don't know, £1,500, £30,000, £75,000. And all of the experience that you get from doing each one builds your confidence, builds your ability, and then like it's entirely possible. And there are also sources of support out there. People in Greater Manchester, Flourish, we support people with this. Like we have funding particularly for Manchester and now Stockport for local residents to get support with bid writing. Hoping we might be able to get some funding for Trafford at some point soon. But we'll see. We'll see. Fingers crossed. But it is entirely possible. So have faith in yourself because you can do this. And Z is for a snoring noise. I know it's really, really tempting for a lot of people who really care about this project to work themselves in the ground trying to get the absolute perfect bid, and get it absolutely like nothing, absolutely nothing, no holes you could poke in it whatsoever. But as I said, sometimes it just isn't your day and it's not your fault. And so you also really, really need to look after yourself and don't burn the midnight oil writing applications right up until midnight. You will do your best work if you're taking care of yourself and you're looking after your well-being and you're doing these funding applications with a clear head and with help as well. So look after yourselves and don't burn yourselves out, please, please, trying to find funding. And that's the end of the alphabet. So any questions about those last few things? I know we've got a couple of minutes left. And then I have one very quick activity for you before we finish. Very quick activity.
There's not a question,
Anything?
Abby, but there is oh, sorry, I'll let Dave, oh, just an observation from Emma that she looked up what she'd received and noticed some funders didn't share the links with them. And also it was interesting how they have chosen to describe their funds. So just an observation that I'll let
Interesting. Very
David.
interesting. David?
Yeah, well, just a point to make first of all. I've applied for, I think it's four bids, and effectively didn't get any of them, but not because they were assessed, because I just didn't manage to get them in on time. I just completely underestimated just how much work was involved in it, and you know, didn't make the time available for it, and then the time had gone past, and so that's kind of knocked a lot of my confidence because that's 100% failure rate. But your point about you can do it, I think what I've been doing is I've been building this bid process up as 100% failure rate, lots of work, and therefore it's all just too hard. But I think you mentioned that, once you've actually got one in and your confidence gets built and you've got a bit of, skills and understanding, that you may be able to then go for more. So I've taken heart at that.
Good. I'm really glad. I'm really glad. And all the content that you've written from those bids, even if you didn't manage to get them in on time, that's all stuff you can reuse for other future applications. Like it's not a complete waste of your time. But
No,
yes,
it's not.
you can spend your whole life writing bids. There is so many and it can take so much time. But yeah, having faith in yourself and looking after yourself as well, and also finding out about them as early as possible so that you're ready for the application deadline.
Yeah,
And
a
getting
lot of
help,
these
getting
were
help as
from,
well.
I think somebody mentioned it in the comments, from the People Network. In other words, have you heard about this grant? And I'm like, nope, I
Hmm.
have not.
Yeah,
And
LinkedIn is good for that as well. Being plugged in, like joining up with various grant making people. Like there's a guy called John Ellery who's worth connecting with on LinkedIn. I can't think of the name of his organisation, but it's all about finding funds. And so he and other colleagues and people around the fundraising, like LinkedIn, will then start suggesting various fundraising people to connect with. Like they're a brilliant source of information of things that they've
it all
spotted.
seems to be out there, doesn't it?
Yeah, it is. It's just not
It's
necessarily
fine.
easy to find all the time.
I do actually have a question though. It wasn't really covered today, but or rather, it was mentioned today. But we're currently looking to do some crowdfunding, and I've never done crowdfunding before in my life. I was kind of thinking, do you have any recommendations for crowdfunding platform that would be suitable for a charity?
Oh, there are a bunch off the top of my head. I suddenly can't remember any, but I will look them up and send them. I've got your email address. I'll send them on to you. Crowdfunding is a whole other kettle of fish, and it's a lot of work and a lot of time. So you've got to be really sort of like committed to doing it. Oh, Kickstarter's one. GoFundMe, Just Giving,
Crowdfunder is
Crowdfunder, yes. So there are various ones out there. Those are the most common ones. There's another one whose name I suddenly can't remember. Put them on, anyone who can think of them, put them in the chat, please.
I'll be
But
very
yes,
grateful. Thank you. We've
tips
got
and
something
tricks.
that would suit a crowdfunding campaign as
Hmm.
opposed to bid writing, but it's
We
just
can
not
have a
something.
conversation about that offline. Like, please feel free to pick that up with me. I haven't run crowdfunding campaigns, but Nicola has. For anyone who doesn't know Nicola, she's the managing director of Flourish. She's run crowdfunding, and I'm sure she'll be like wealth of information about that kind of thing.
Oh,
Anyway,
that's
one
excellent.
last
Thank you
thing
very
before we
much.
finish. Another thing that if you would like to access, I will send along um, with the slides, pre-application checklist. I've made a document where you can tick off each of these things to have sort of in your arsenal of things ready to apply. So when you do get a fund come up that you want to apply for, you've already got a load of the stuff. You like got your basic copy, you've got all your organizational information, and you can just plug it straight into the application form. Also means that someone else could do it on your behalf. Anyway, I'll send that round with the slides. Just want to let you know that that's there. One more activity in the last minute. I would be so, so grateful if you could give me some feedback on Mentimeter. I'm aware this has been a huge information blast, and I hope it hasn't been too overwhelming. But if you could just get out your phones, open up the Photos app, and then if you put your phone over this, then it should give you a yellow box link to press. And then if you could just type in, anything that you think could have been better, anything that particularly went well, things that have been particularly valuable to you, it would be really, really useful for me in then building future bid writing activity. And then, actually, one more thing that I do want to tell you, anyone in Greater Manchester, upcoming Flourish events, we got loads and loads of stuff coming up, as always, from salsa classes to an upcoming mentorathon. I know a couple of you in this room have already been involved in mentorathons in the past. On Thursday, the 6th of August, in Trafford, in Altrincham, so round the corner from both David and Natalia, I believe. Um, I'm going to be running a bid writing peer support day. So if you've got a bid that you're currently writing, or you're struggling to get started with, we're going to have like Flourish staff doing one-to-one support, and then also people in the room reading each other's bids, giving feedback, and then you get to experience being on both sides of the table, being the funder and also receiving feedback from other people on your funding application. So look for Flourish CIC on Eventbrite, and then have a look for the bid writing peer support day, and it'd be really wonderful to see you there. There are various different options of ways in which you can participate. So you can tick boxes on the Eventbrite. Go and have a look. Go and have a look. I'll also put a link in the follow-up email to this session.
Can I just jump in, Abby, for the QR code? Is there also a link for people who are on their phones, or can I include that in?
Oh, yes. Oh,
Okay,
gosh. I,
we can include that in the follow-up email, maybe with
yeah,
the recording. Yeah.
yes. Yeah, good thing. We'll do that.
Just
Thank you.
another suggestion, registering for Just Giving is helpful because then other people can fundraise for you. I don't know if Just Giving has a subscription fee or some sort of cost applied to it. I think it does.
I
I don't
don't know.
know, but yeah, it's Just Giving certainly is another. You are given a page or a profile, I think, that people can then view and support you. But I think it may, or it used to have a fee attached to it. But anyway, worth exploring.
Yeah, worth knowing. Absolutely. Thank you, Anna. And that's us done. That's us done for the day. More Flourish resources, ways to get hold of us. This will all be in the slides afterwards. Um, and we're going to do stop screen sharing. Hopefully you can now see me instead of my just my random screen. There you go, stop share. Thank you everyone so much for coming. I really hope it's been valuable. Again, I'd really, really appreciate your feedback so that we can help build this and make sure we're always offering the most useful thing to everyone. And I hope you will have a lovely rest of your days. All right, thank you everyone.